Good morning, afternoon, and greetings to everybody. I wanted to make a relatively shorter video as compared to the previous one, which if you haven't watched, I'll probably leave a link in the description to check that one out, because that's the complete breakdown of what I'm about to say and somewhat of an extension to what I'm going to say in this video. So the first thing that I forgot to cover on the dollar index was I mentioned in the previous video that we could see a possibility of us trading lower into the consequent encroachment of the monthly buy side imbalance, of this massive buy side imbalance here. So measuring this area from here to here, we have the consequent encroachment residing there. So going down on the daily chart, that's the consequent encroachment, and I was expecting a possible bounce from here to the upside. And I also mentioned that if we are not going to see a push back to the upside, then we're probably going to aim for this sell side liquidity and this sell side liquidity. So of course, I also did mention in that video that I was looking for a push to the upside. But one thing that I wanted to quickly show in this video is essentially the AMD theory that Michael teaches, ICT, which is accumulation, manipulation, and distribution. So let's see what that looks like in theory. Let's go down to the weekly. On the weekly chart, we can see that the whole year, from the beginning of January until this point, actually until this point in July, we essentially chopped around in the dollar index. We started off here, we went higher, came back lower, sweeping these lows, came back again higher into the range, but did not create a new high, and then came back here. So to me, this could be considered a chop, right? So I'll consider this to be a choppy area. And finally in July, we ran very quickly into a high time frame PDRA. Of course, we know that this high time frame PDRA was from a monthly chart where we have the buy side imbalance sitting there. So we chopped around and then ran deep into a high time frame PDRA, then immediately rejected back to the upside, right? So going back to the weekly chart, we can see we rejected up and pushed higher. So AMD, or the power of 3 that my ICT or Michael teaches, basically looks something like that. And let's have another sort of quick depiction of what that may look like. So we have price ranging. It might not be as perfect as this, but this we would consider it to be a chop. And if we notice, most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, this is common during the Asia session, right? And then we see a full breakout out of this range, but then an immediate pushback up. This to me now becomes the Judas swing, as ICT teaches. And finally we get the distribution leg, which is here. So price will come and find something like this play out. So this is accumulation, manipulation, and distribution, the power 3. And you could also call it AMD, you could also call it the chop, the Judas, and distribution, as I do with most of my videos: chop, Judas, distribution. And I think this was also clear on the previous video that I made on one of the pound pairs, which I believe was GBP Swiss. On a weekly chart, we can see something similar to that forming right now in this portion of price. If you remember what my illustration looks like, you can see this was a clear chop around, and then out of nowhere we displaced lower, right, into this area, a higher time frame PDRA, which was the consequent encroachment of the higher time frame tail, this long tail. Anyway, so we got a chop, we got a Judas, and I was expecting a distribution leg here now. So basically the exact same thing as we have here on GBP Swiss. So going back to the dollar index, seeing this happen here, right? Seeing a chop, a Judas, and a distribution, and going back down to the daily chart, because price is fractal, I am seeing essentially more or less the same thing, right? We can see how much we chopped around for so long in this range. We did not even break to any direction. Of course, I wanted us to break above and then eventually trade lower from after clearing this buy side liquidity, this swing high. I was expecting us to trade lower into November, right? By November 15, I wanted us to start displacing lower from there, but then we didn't get that. What we got was a chop around for a very long time, from the beginning of October till the beginning of November. So the whole month of October we chopped around, and now we are breaking out again into a high time frame PDRA, which we already know is a monthly buy side imbalance, right? So after chopping around, we're breaking into a high time frame PDRA. We should also keep in mind that we are still in the first week of the month, and there's a possibility that we could just have a very long tail from this point going into the last 3 weeks of the month. Take for example this candlestick right here. This candlestick was a full green candle. This was a full bullish candle, and now it has a very long tail because people were probably thinking it's gonna keep going to the moon. Came back all the way down, created a new candle that even went lower than the previous one. So at this point we're fully green, and we almost became red, and this candle was actually red once upon a time. It was a bearish candle before a push up. So I'm expecting the same thing here. I'm expecting that by the end of this month this candle turns green to the upside, right? And then you can see whatever we see after that. So that's what I'm expecting on the dollar, the accumulation, manipulation, distribution from the daily chart. I'm still not bearish in these markets yet. Of course, I did say on my previous video that we might see an opportunity to sell it down into the consequent encroachment, because we haven't tagged that yet. But ultimately, I would rather see a bounce from that consequent encroachment before pushing up from there, and I would rather take the opportunities to buy it up than to sell it down. So that's the first thing I wanted to highlight. The next thing I wanted to highlight was seasonal tendencies on the dollar index. I have the seasonal tendency of the dollar index here. And we can see that in the month of November, right, from the beginning of November, we're expecting, well, statistically, we're expecting a rally up in the dollar from the beginning until somewhere in the middle of November. Going to the third week of November, you see a push down, and then again in December. So yeah, I am nothing but bullish on the dollar, and I think this seasonal tendency is going to hold, and us falling off as much as we did during NFP is just to give us a discount to participate in this rally to the upside. So that's all I think, and that's what I think. My invalidation point that I put in the video still stands, which if you paid attention to the previous one, you remember that I put it at this low. I said I don't want to see us take out this low right here, because it's the third candle that created the fair value gap, the BC. When we do take out this low, then I can change my bias and consider bearish prices from there. But ultimately, I would only be looking for buys. I would only be looking for higher prices on the dollar index. So let's move on to the next thing that I wanted to talk about as an extension of the previous video, which is on the NASDAQ. I only have 3 things to talk about in this video, by the way. So the NASDAQ, we have a possibility that I saw on the weekly chart. I looked at the fact that we have this weekly buy side imbalance with the on the December contract, looking up there, NQZ 2023. I'm looking at the fact that on the continuous contract, comparing that to the December contract, with the settlement price turned off. Even when you turn it on, actually it's still the same. We can see that the bodies of these candles are still within the weekly buy side imbalance, measuring this candlestick's high to this candlestick's low, and we got this 5-value gap in the form of a buy side imbalance, sell side inefficiency. So we can see the bodies are still within this area and pushing higher from here. So I'd like to see if this was a possible. I'm trying to see if we could possibly respect bullish prices from here. I did mention that I wanted to see a liquidity sweep of these highs on the E-mini S&P 500 and then a continuation to the downside. But NASDAQ being the stronger of the two sisters, if I was to participate in any longing or buying opportunities, it would be on the NASDAQ. So I'm paying attention to a possibility of us creating a shift in market structure already, and this being a valid bullish order block on a weekly chart. So this could be considered a weekly order block, right? And we could see price returning back to this area. Let's set an alert on it. We could see price returning back into this weekly order block and then a continuation to the upside, clearing these swing highs and possibly even the all-time high. Of course, the all-time high is not really visible in this December contract, but it's not too far from here. So this being the first real massive expansion after so long, because we haven't really gotten a bullish candle on a weekly chart as big as this one is in a very long time. So this expansion really makes me feel that we might be due for some sort of push to the upside, a change or a break in the market structure, and we might see the chances of us returning back to this area on a daily chart, this 5-value gap, because it's within the weekly order block as well, and a continuation to the upside from here. So I'm paying attention to this possibility as well on the NASDAQ. I'm not here to pick the tops or the bottoms, but this might be a possibility. So that was the second thing I wanted to point out on NQ. I don't want to go in a deep down in an in-depth breakdown of the NASDAQ because I've already done that in the previous video. Again, it will be linked in the description. But I also wanted to cover the seasonal tendencies the same way that I covered on the dollar index. So this is the seasonal tendency chart for the Dow, I believe. Well, it's a screenshot that I got from one of ICT's videos, and we can see at the bottom there, from October, the beginning of October, we see price sort of play around, got a dip around November and an expansion to the upside going into December. So we can see around here, around the end of October or the beginning of November, we can see an expansion to the upside. Of course, I know this is the Dow, but I use the three of them, the three averages, interchangeably because they should, in a symmetrical market, correspond with each other. They should work together. So let's check another seasonal tendency chart on the NASDAQ as well. We have this one that's not the clearest, but still shows or depicts the same thing. We can see an expansion always to the upside, but here in November we see at the beginning of, well, from the end of October till somewhere after the first week of November, we see a dip down, retracement, another further dip down, and then a continuation going to the end of November. This was what I was expecting to see. I wanted to see us dip down, and around the same time the dollar index should be reversing from the buy side that I highlighted earlier to the downside. I'm expecting the indices to do the opposite and push up here around the middle of November. So we might see, I wanted to see this, but comparing the two averages, the two seasonal tendencies, I'm open to the possibility of us pushing higher on the NASDAQ. Of course, nothing is set to stone, so I'll be paying attention to how we trade day by day, week by week, and session by session. So I've already highlighted a possible longing opportunity that I would consider from this area. So yeah, we'll see if this daily fair value gap can hold for higher prices. The last thing that I wanted to cover does not necessarily have to do with this chart, but this chart actually does give a good example of it. So it was on market structure shifts. I did mention on my previous video that a valid market structure shift happens when a previous swing high has been swept and closed above that previous swing high. I wanted to point out the fact that sometimes a market structure shift does not necessarily have to happen when that happens. Like in this case, this would have been a valid market structure shift because we swept the sell sides here, we swept the lows and tapped into a high time frame PDRA, and now we're displaced into the opposite direction. So this is a valid 2022 model with a proper market structure shift at that point. So I'd look for any retracement back into this area and the continuation to the upside. So yeah, that's how I thought a market structure shift. But I wanted to say that sometimes you don't necessarily have to wait for a swing high. I wait for it because it's the cleanest. But let's say you were on the weekly chart. A market structure shift can also happen when, in this case, we just created a bullish order block. We closed above this previous candle. That makes, in my mind, that makes me think that any retracement back into this area, I should look for an opportunity to take the NASDAQ to the upside. It can also happen when we close past a PDRA that should have been respected. I think we've seen that in many of the instances that we covered on the other pairs, which I'm not sure if I'll be able to find one, but here, for example, we have this fair value gap. We closed above it, and at that point, when we closed above it, at this point, we can consider the market structure to have shifted. We're no longer bearish and we're possibly bullish. So when the next candle opens and tapped into it, we could look for longing opportunities to take this pair to the upside. So something like this could also be a valid market structure shift, but it's cleanest when you look at it on a lower time frame and actually spot a swing high that has been swept and closed above or below. So that's all I have in this video, and I just wanted to make sure that I've covered everything that I needed to cover. The only other thing I didn't point out is that I will still be paying attention to oil, which I think I did point out, but I'll still be paying attention to crude oil, and I'm looking for higher prices on this. For now, good luck and good trading.